It happened as I stood before my mother's grave. My youngest granddaughter came running toward me, teary-eyed, crying, "Snake!" At first I thought it was just an earthworm or something similar. But then, from a crevice beside the burial mound, an actual snake slithered out. It was unusually thick, and its eyes felt as though it was looking at me like a person would. One of my brothers shouted and chased it away, waving a branch. But at that moment, I knew it wasn't just a snake. If you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll face a truth that is nearly impossible to imagine about what was buried in that grave alongside my mother. Before I begin, please take a moment to like the video. Now, let's start. Hello, my name is John Mansu. I live in a rural town in Pennsylvania. I am 68 years old and the eldest of 12 siblings. Growing up with so many siblings meant constant fights over meals, but as we grew older, it became a point of pride. During holidays, when our whole family gathered, the house would be filled with noise and laughter, and neighbors would joke, "When the Johnsons gather, it's like a village festival." It was our mother who made such a large family possible. In a world where even having 3 children was burdensome, she gave birth to 12. All 12 grew up, had children of their own, and are doing well. Thanks to her, the townspeople used to say our family was blessed. It has now been 3 years since she passed. We laid her to rest on a gentle hillside near our town. The site was sunny and well situated. As the eldest son, I scouted the burial site, and my siblings all agreed it was a perfect place. This past March, to mark the 3rd anniversary of her passing, the family gathered once more. While we had visited the grave before during previous winters, the icy paths and our aging father's health often prevented us from bringing him along. But this year, we were fortunate. The weather was mild, with a hint of spring warmth, and we thought it would please our mother to have her husband visit. Though leaving the house isn't easy for him, upon hearing that all the children would be together, Father quietly pulled out his old hat and said, "Let's go. I need to visit your mother." His words made my chest tighten with emotion. His steps were slow but steady that day. At the grave, the grass around the low mound was growing well. Some of the grandchildren ran around playing, while the daughters-in-law laid out the food offerings we had brought. Father, unable to stand for long, sat on a flat stone, gazing quietly at my mother's grave. That's when my youngest granddaughter came running toward us again, her voice trembling. "Snake!" At first I thought she was overreacting to a worm, but when I looked where she pointed, I saw it. A real snake was slowly emerging from a crack near the gravestone. Its brownish body was surprisingly thick, and its eyes gave off a strange sense of awareness, as if it were observing us. Some of my brothers shouted, waving branches to chase it away. Only then did it slip into the bushes, but I clearly saw Father's hand trembling at that moment. "Father, are you all right?" As I approached and took his hand, he whispered, "There's something wrong with your mother's grave." Even when I asked for clarification, he said nothing more. Still, the snake's strange eyes and my father's shaking hand remained vivid in my mind. Even as we returned home to the noisy gathering of family, that unsettling feeling lingered. My siblings tried to calm me down. "Big brother, it's not unusual to see snakes in a country graveyard. Don't overthink it. You always worry too much, you know. At our age, we should let go of unnecessary worries or we'll age faster." Right. It probably just woke up from hibernation under the grass. But no matter how they tried to reassure me, I couldn't shake the uneasiness. The snake had emerged from the exact front right side of my mother's grave, a spot we had carefully packed when constructing the mound. That day, the grass there was oddly yellow and the soil looked slightly sunken. Eventually, I drove out to the grave alone. There wasn't a single soul in the mountain. The dry wind of late winter brushed against my face, and the forest path crackled with fallen branches underfoot. When I arrived at the grave, I stood at a distance, observing for a long time. After who knows how long, it appeared again. The snake emerged once more, this time from right beside the mound. It moved even slower than before, cautiously raising its body as if meeting my gaze for a moment before disappearing behind the grave. My heart froze, and I nearly dropped the water bottle I was holding. I approached carefully and touched the soil where the snake vanished. The ground there was oddly loose and damp, unlike the surrounding areas, like someone had recently dug and refilled it. I could feel it instinctively. Someone had disturbed this grave. The grass was wilted and one corner of the mound seemed subtly tilted. "Catherine, what is happening?" Kneeling before the grave, I couldn't bring myself to dig any deeper. I was too afraid of what I might find. Upon returning home, I immediately contacted the local township office and the cemetery committee. My mother's grave feels wrong. The mound seems sunken, and there are strange signs, and snakes keep appearing. It feels like someone has tampered with the grave. The official took my report seriously. Grave robbery still occasionally happened, he said. They would launch a formal investigation and dispatch an inspection team. And so, I made up my mind. It felt as if my mother was trying to tell me something, whether through the snake's eyes or through the disturbed soil. She wanted me to look closer. I had to open the grave. I contacted my siblings again. A few days ago, despite their busy schedules, everyone had managed to gather for the memorial, but this time, many declined, guessing what I intended. "Let's delay it, unless it's something serious. We've got too much going on these days." In the end, only about half of my 12 siblings showed up. Even then, I could see the tension in their faces. Deep down, everyone knew something was wrong. Our father sat silently at one end of the table, while the rest of us talked in hushed tones. When I finally said, "I think we need to exhume Mother's grave," the air instantly went cold. "Brother, what are you saying? You want to do this just because of a snake? We see snakes all the time, even when we go hiking upstate. You chose that burial spot yourself. Why this sudden talk about moving her?" My youngest brother frowned, while the third brother cautiously asked, "Why? Is there something more than the snake?" I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos I had taken a few days earlier. Pictures of the sunken soil, the dead grass, and the blurry image of the snake. "Look, isn't this too strange to dismiss as coincidence? The snake appeared twice, at the exact same spot, and the soil has been disturbed. Someone's definitely tampered with it." After a long silence, the siblings split into two camps. Some said to leave it alone, others said we should at least verify what was going on. My second brother spoke firmly. "Brother, this is sacred ground. The ancestors rest here. Disturbing it may bring bad luck upon the family. If someone really did tamper with it, wouldn't that make it even worse to leave Mother buried under such conditions? She wouldn't want that." I bowed my head, unable to respond. Even as the eldest, I was still just one among 12. To exhume Mother's grave meant reopening not only her resting place, but also the emotions and conflicts within our family. Then Father quietly spoke. "I had my eyes on that spot for years," he began. "Though John found the place, I had guided him there in my heart." We all turned toward him. "But when that snake came out of your mother's grave that day, I knew. That wasn't just an animal. It was a sign trying to speak." Hearing those words, I realized I wasn't imagining things. Father slowly nodded. "Dig it up, John. You do it. One of you has to take responsibility." With that, even the siblings who were initially against it quietly lowered their heads. I formally applied for the exhumation. The necessary paperwork was processed, and the excavation was scheduled for the first day of the second lunar month, a traditional auspicious day. But until that day came, I barely slept. The snake's eyes, the unsettling energy by the grave, and the unknown truth that still lay hidden weighed heavily on my mind. On the morning of the exhumation, a thick fog blanketed the hillside. Though the sun had risen, the mountain remained damp, and the fallen leaves stuck to our shoes as we climbed the path. That day, 8 of my siblings joined, along with the funeral director's team and officials from the township office. My siblings stood at a distance while I, my throat dry, supported my father at the front of the mound. "We're ready to begin," said the funeral director. The shovels struck the earth. 3 workers took turns removing the layers of soil, breaking down the burial mound bit by bit. I stood in silence, staring at the grave, clutching an old photo of Mother in my sweating hands. About 30 minutes into the digging, a worker let out a surprised gasp. "The coffin isn't alone down here." The funeral director paused, then said, "The depth is unusual. There are 2 coffins." My heart dropped. "What do you mean, 2 coffins? There's another one on top of hers. They're stacked." My siblings murmured anxiously, and my vision blurred. 2 coffins, one lying directly above the other. "This is a case of illegal double burial," the funeral director muttered under his breath. "Someone secretly placed another coffin on top of hers and covered it with soil." My mother had been lying silently beneath that heavy burden all this time. The sound that burst from my mouth wasn't a scream or a cry. It was something between a gasp and a wail. Beside me, Father collapsed to his knees. My siblings rushed to support him as the entire scene fell into chaos. The arrangement of the coffins was utterly incomprehensible. The upper coffin was relatively new. "This is a serious violation," the funeral director whispered. Who could have done something like this?" someone muttered, but no one answered. The township official said they would investigate the upper coffin through administrative records and began taking photographs of the scene. The funeral team carefully separated the 2 coffins and loaded them onto hearses. Even as my mother's coffin was being lifted, I couldn't stop thinking about how she had silently endured, lying beneath that weight for all this time, without anyone knowing. The snake had come to reveal it. Its gaze wasn't eerie after all. It had been my mother's gaze. "John, help me." It was as if she had spoken through the snake, begging to be freed from her silent imprisonment. I now felt terror, not from the exhumation, but from what I still didn't know. Who was inside that second coffin? Why had they been buried above my mother? We transferred my mother's coffin to a family cemetery nearby. The upper coffin was temporarily stored under the care of the authorities for further investigation. A few days later, the township office contacted me. There were no official burial permits or registry entries for the upper coffin. However, through dental records found in the remains, the identity of the person was confirmed. The deceased is listed as Mina Park, who passed away 3 years ago in the spring. The registered mother is John Kim. The moment I heard the names, my heart sank. Jean Kim, Mina Park. They were names deeply tied to our family. Jean Kim was my mother's oldest and dearest friend. They had married into the same village, farmed side by side, raised children, and shared life like sisters for decades. We children had called her Aunt Jean since we were little, though she wasn't a blood relative. It simply became second nature. While my mother raised 12 children, Aunt Jean had always longed for just one. Just one. If only I could have one, she would sigh. Each time my mother gave birth, Aunt Jean would visit with a bowl of kimchi soup, smiling and saying, "You've been blessed again." My mother felt great sympathy for her, and even while struggling with morning sickness, would share herbs and offer talismans from dreams she had, hoping Aunt Jean might also have a child someday. And then, miraculously, close to the age of 40, Aunt Jean finally had a daughter, Mina Park. As a child, Mina would often visit our home sitting on my mother's lap. But Mina, she had died 3 years ago. The very same spring our mother passed away. I searched for an address and made my way to a local nursing home where I had heard Aunt Jean was now residing. Peeking quietly into her room through a slightly open door, I saw her sitting on the bed, staring blankly at a dark, turned-off television screen. She barely moved, her eyes seeming lost in some distant time. As I stood silently in the hallway, a nurse approached me gently. "Are you a family member?" I slightly bowed my head. "No, she and my mother shared a very long bond. They were very close." The nurse looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "I see." She used to call out her daughter's name now and then. "Mina, my Mina," she would say quietly. But even that has stopped lately. I hesitated for a moment before asking cautiously, "Was there a tragedy?" The nurse paused, then answered softly. "About 3 years ago, her daughter passed away from postpartum hemorrhaging. The baby didn't survive either. She handled the funeral alone, quietly. Since then, she hasn't really seen anyone. A neighbor found her collapsed months later, and she was admitted here as a state-dependent senior. No visitors, no family anymore." My heart sank. Honestly, I never even knew Mina had gotten married. She used to visit us often as a child, and Aunt Jean would come help my mother with farm work. But one year, they simply moved away, and we lost touch. Neither my mother nor Aunt Jean spoke much about it afterward. As life went on, we all grew busy with our own families, and the old ties faded into distant memories. Now, as I left the hospital, their names kept echoing in my head. Jean Kim, my mother's closest friend, who once smiled and said, "You have so many blessings. 12 children. How wonderful." But now I finally understood the hidden meaning behind those words. Far too late. That night, I opened my mother's old belongings, keepsakes, faded photographs, and a few worn letters. In one picture, Aunt Jean stood beside my mother on kimchi making day, wearing rubber gloves, smiling for the camera. How could she have placed her daughter on top of my mother's grave? After that visit, I returned to the nursing home many times, sitting silently by Aunt Jean's bedside. She would always gaze blankly out the window or at the dark TV, never acknowledging me or speaking a single word. I had no expectations the day I quietly entered again. But this time, her eyes weren't focused outside or at the screen. They were looking straight at me. I sat gently beside her and placed an old photograph of my mother into her frail hands. Her fingers trembled slightly at the touch of the photo. And then, her head turned slowly, and for the first time, her eyes met mine. In that gaze, I saw something familiar, like meeting an old friend after many years, a mixture of relief, sadness, and an ache for something forever unreachable. Her lips began to part, releasing faint, gasping words. She never once, not even once, hated me. When I was crying because I couldn't have children, she brought me kimchi soup without saying a word. When I was sick with morning sickness, she made me broth, gave me talismans she said came from dreams. She was to me. To me. Her voice weakened, but her lips kept moving as though releasing a long-buried confession. Such a blessed woman, 12 children, all healthy, all grown. I thought maybe, if my Mina lay there, under that grave of blessings, maybe she could breathe again. The shaman said so. If she rested upon a blessed woman's grave, she might come back, might return to me. At that moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Her words sounded like madness, yet her tone and her eyes carried the weight of a lifelong, unspoken truth. My Mina, my poor Mina. She sobbed softly, recalling how she had wiped her daughter's tears in the hospital, apologizing over and over again. If only she could be reborn and happy somewhere else. I would have done anything. Anything. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Her empty gaze, once lost to the world, was now locked on mine, carrying within it both human guilt and boundless love. I couldn't say a word. Only then did I truly understand. To Aunt Jean, my mother was never someone to envy. She was salvation, a final chance to cradle her lost child, even in death. Her daughter had died giving birth, and she had lost everything. That grave had been her desperate, final prayer. I left the hospital room, leaving the photo resting gently in her hand. Before I stepped away, I saw her fingers softly holding the edge of the picture. Leaning against the hallway window, I stood for a long time, feeling a weight inside me ease, if only slightly. Whatever Aunt Jean's intentions had been, my mother had accepted even that, lying beneath it all without anger, without rejection. She had always been the kind of person who embraced everything in silence. And now I felt it was time to bring this story to an end. A few days later, the police station contacted me. Based on the exhumation photos and the township report, an official investigation was being launched for illegal burial. The officer told me, "This is a clear violation. Unauthorized double interment is a serious crime. If the family chooses to press charges, it could result in criminal prosecution." Holding the phone, I stared silently at the wall. The word prosecution kept echoing in my head. I hung up and informed my siblings about the situation. Once again, the family split into two camps. "This is a crime. She buried someone on top of Mom. We can't just let this go." But she didn't mean harm. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. She lost her mind after losing her daughter. Still, how do we justify what was done to Mom? She was crushed beneath another coffin. The arguments were heated. In the end, they left the decision to me. "You decide, brother. You've been the one taking care of Mom's grave all these years." That night, I quietly entered Father's room. The room was still. Father sat by the window, gazing out into the dark, where the faint glow of the street lamp softly lit one side of his face. After hesitating, I finally spoke. "Father, the police called. If we press charges, she will face punishment. What should we do?" Father slowly turned his head. His gaze no longer held its usual firmness. Instead, I saw old, heavy weariness, and above all, a sadness that required no words. He stared at me for a long moment, then began to speak in a low, quiet voice. "Do you remember the day your grandmother died? Jean came to our gate that morning. She didn't even take off her shoes. She dropped to her knees and wept. When I went out to help her up, she pressed her hands against the ground and kept muttering. I still had things to say to her. She left too soon. At the time, I just thought she was overwhelmed with grief. Father sighed deeply. Even after they moved away, your mother and Jean kept in touch quietly. They would exchange greetings after the holidays, and when Jean fell ill, your mother would send her medicine, even from afar. He paused for a moment, then continued, I even heard about Mina's wedding through them. We couldn't attend because your mother's health had worsened, but we sent a gift through someone else. They supported each other for years without ever making a fuss. Jean once told me, without her, I don't think I could have survived that house or that life. Whenever she was suffering, your mother would appear with a bowl of kimchi soup or a small towel. She said that saved her, made her feel human again. Father then began to reveal stories I had never known, stories only the adults in our family had carried. Jean's life was full of pain. Her husband was unfaithful and wasted what little money they had. Her mother-in-law despised her for not having children and openly mocked her. The villagers would politely greet her but spoke ill behind her back. For years, she couldn't conceive. Finally, after much hardship, she bore a daughter at over 40 years old. But even then, her troubles weren't over. Her in-laws cursed her for having a daughter, saying their family line would end. She lived under constant judgment and fell sick often. Through all of that, your mother was her only comfort, the one person who never judged her, who offered silent kindness again and again. Father's voice grew heavier. Her husband died young, and all she had left was Mina. But then Mina died giving birth, and the baby died too. That's when Jeanne completely lost herself. She's been living like a ghost ever since. She doesn't even recognize anyone now. She has no one left to call her name. Father closed his eyes for a moment before continuing, Yes, it was wrong. Deeply wrong. You do not touch the grave of the dead, no matter the reason. But John... He paused again and spoke with quiet resignation. Hasn't she already suffered enough? She lost everything. She buried her child and grandchild and then lost her own mind. That's punishment in itself. She knows what she did was unforgivable, but she was desperate. I don't think she was in her right mind when she did it. She was simply trying to give her daughter one last comfort. At his words, I could no longer argue. The phrase, blessed family, which I had once heard as a compliment, was to others a reminder of their emptiness and pain. My mother's generosity and patience had allowed even a coffin to be placed atop hers. It was not what she would have wanted, but I believe she would have accepted it without resentment, as she had accepted everything in life. Comforting myself with that thought, I slowly let go of the anger inside me. The next morning, I called the police. I told them I would not press charges. Yes, it was illegal, but there was no malice. It was merely the final resting place of an old grief. When I put the receiver down, I felt as if a whole season had passed within me. The emptiness was still there, but for the first time it felt lighter, like a long twisted knot had finally loosened. A few days later, the phone rang again. From the very moment the call came, a strange chill settled in my chest. It was an unfamiliar number, but somehow I had a feeling I knew what it was. The nurse's voice on the other end was cautious, almost whispering. Mr. Mansu, Aunt Jeanne passed away peacefully this morning. After those words, there was only silence. No other sounds reached my ears. The world seemed to pause for a moment, shrouded in quiet. Since she had no living family registered, but you visited frequently and left your contact information, I thought you should know. You may not be legally family, but I wanted someone to be informed of her passing. The nurse continued speaking, but I barely heard the words. Instead, I felt a cold emptiness spreading through my chest, like walking a snowy mountain path and hearing the faint crack of ice beneath your feet. Neither heavy nor light, but undeniably real. Even after hanging up, I sat frozen, unable to move for a long time. That afternoon, I quietly began making funeral arrangements. Aunt Jean's remains had been prepared in a simple casket, covered with a clean white cloth. Her file now bore only 3 words: no known relatives. Mina's remains had already been cremated after the exhumation and stored as an unclaimed urn at the city crematorium, while Aunt Jean still rested in her coffin, preserving her body. Her daughter was now reduced to a small, nameless urn. As I looked upon her, I felt a pang of hesitation. I didn't want Aunt Jean's body to be cremated like her daughter's. It felt too harsh to erase every last trace of her existence from the world. Her body, her hands, and her time deserved to return to the earth whole. Her daughter was already dust, but at least Aunt Jean could return to the soil as she was. And so I chose to bury them both together. There was a small plot of land left on the hill where my father had once reserved space. I buried Aunt Jean's coffin alongside Mina's small urn. The 2 graves now rest there on that gentle slope, facing the sunlight. No grand markers, no elaborate headstones, just simple mounds of earth, quietly nestled among the wildflowers. From my home, I can often see the hill, its outline visible each morning and evening. Father too would glance that way and nod quietly, saying only, "You did well. She won't be alone now." That single sentence was enough. Among my siblings, there were some murmurs. "She put a coffin on top of Mom's grave, and yet our brother went too far, showing sympathy. Maybe he got too emotional." The whispers flowed softly, indirectly behind my back. But I offered no reply. There was no need to explain the kind of feeling that now rested between those 2 graves. I wanted to believe that if my mother were watching from her resting place, she would have understood that even when the second coffin was laid above hers, she had known why. And in the end, she would have nodded gently, as if to say, "You've come. It's all right." Each time I place a single chrysanthemum on the 2 graves and turn away, the wind stirs the grass, whispering softly, as if 2 long, intertwined fates are quietly greeting one another. And then I walk down that hill once more, toward the life I must continue living day by day.